Hello there, and welcome to our last discussion for week 3, the poetry unit, discussion number 9. This discussion is our final discussion that is introducing you to your essay for the unit, which is a poetry analysis. I know that's a shocker that you would analyze a poem, but that is what's happening for the poetry unit in this last discussion. So because brainstorming is such a crucial process within generating writing and coming up with ideas, I thought it would be a good idea to have a discussion where you do just that. You talk about kind of what you're interested in regarding essay number 2. You look at your options, and then you can kind of share and brainstorm a little bit. I mentioned in the discussion for short stories on the prompt for essay number 1 that part of this process is generating what writers call that shitty first draft. And it's a technical term that was created by Anne Lamott, if you're interested in looking it up. But really, she just talks about writing as a process and what that process looks like for her and for many other writers. It's very relatable. So again, this discussion is just brainstorming. We're talking out ideas. Talk is the exercise ground for writers. And so that's our discussion here. I'm just going to go over the prompt to clarify anything, because sometimes it's easier to hear someone talk about an idea than it is to read about it, and so especially online when you're reading lots of text. And so here's your prompt, so you can start brainstorming and posting a draft or a response to essay number 2, which is your poetry analysis. So you're going to start first by deciding which of the 2 options you're interested in. So option number 1, you're going to choose a poem that we've read and offer a thoughtful interpretation or an interpretive analysis of it. So think of the discussions that we've had on poetry and the manner in which we've analyzed and applied the concepts. So for instance, if you decide that you're going to do Maya Angelou's Still I Rise, and you want to look at imagery in her poem, there's a lot of imagery there. She talks about oil wells, she talks about hips, she talks about a lot of things that you can analyze in your analysis if you choose that poem or any of the poems. You can look at imagery, tone, repetition. What I want you to do is you're providing an analysis, but you're also connecting the poetry or the poem to issues that we're facing today in today's world. So for instance, I think a really easy example that just popped into my head right now when I was thinking about Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. Yeah, it's about her being a strong black woman, but it's also about, her view on slavery and ancestry and kind of rising above all that past that she has. And so it's very relatable on lots of different levels. And if you were to take that poem and place it into contemporary society, you could connect it to the Me Too movement, the Women's March, things that you see going on in today's world. And so you can decide how you want to connect it to today's world. It doesn't have to be through political movements necessarily, although oftentimes poetry is political. It comes from a place of anger and hurt and bitterness and, wanting to stand up for yourself or wanting to have a voice. And so often it is connected to socio-political issues. So again, you can do that for option number 1. Option number 2, if you're interested in this one, is choosing 2 poems and then kind of looking at them side by side, doing a compare and contrast, maybe how they're similar or how they're different. So it could be Still I Rise. It could be, you could compare that to A Rose That Grew in Concrete by Tupac. Again, it's totally up to you. You might want to skim back over the poems and see, what speaks to you, whether you want to do one here or a compare and contrast. So again, with the compare and contrast, you're going to look at maybe comparing and contrasting the poems, and then if you're trying to push it further into an analysis, maybe talking about which one of the poems is more effective at tone or imagery, while the other one might have more clearer diction or wording or repetition. So you're basically you're looking at the poem side by side to kind of draw something further from them. So digging deeper, making meaning further from them. So one doesn't necessarily have to be better than the other one. You're going to notice the strengths and the weaknesses in both poems if you're comparing them, for example. So that's just an idea of what you might do. You can really come up with any ideas you want regarding the compare and contrast. You know, we often are taught as writers to go into an essay with a thesis or an argument, and that's all fine and dandy, but you know, writers who are experienced know that you can start a piece with an idea of a thesis, but as you write, it develops and morphs into something else entirely. And so maybe you start with an idea of what you want to look at or an idea of what you want to argue, and then use your writing process to explore that and push it further and go deeper, because that's where meaning is made. It's made during that process of discovery and looking at evidence and doing all those things that scientific researchers do with inductive and deductive reasoning and critical thinking. So here are the essay grading requirements. They're not totally different from essay number 1. It has to have a beginning, a middle, and an ending. Typically that looks like a 5-paragraph essay structure, but it could be more than 5 paragraphs as you develop conceptual chunks. If you're not sure, the Little Seagull Handbook talks about compare and contrast. You can refer to that, or you can just Google it. There's lots of really great information on the web about compare and contrast. One resource I think that is super useful is Owl Purdue website. It talks about compare and contrast and offers different templates for how to do it, and different kind of frameworks and outlines for how to do compare and contrast. So proper Mla citing, 3 to 5 full pages, not including your works cited. Your works cited will have the poem or the poems on it that you chose. Remember that you have to cite them properly. So if they're a PDF version or video version, then you're going to look that up. If you want to just cite it as like a poem from a website, you can go to poet.org or any of the websites that have the poems and cite it that way. There are many ways to the mountaintop, so do not stress about it. Use your handbook, ask questions online on the discussion threads, the question discussion thread number 1, the very first one. If you have that question, someone else probably does. We can answer it together. So again, you want it to flow, and you want to include quotes, and then you want to tie in concepts from the class on the section on poetry, imagery, rhythm, etc. The things that really stir you and stand out to you. Those are things you're going to want to write about. And last but not least, edit and proofread that shit, because there's nothing worse than reading a piece as an English professor by someone who I know is super smart but just didn't spend enough time on their writing, and I can see that. It really weakens your overall voice, and it makes it really difficult for me to grade it, because I don't want to mark you down for something silly like editing or proofreading when I know that you're capable of doing it. So again, take a breath, take it slow, enjoy the process, give yourself a little bit of time. I know that time is of the essence when we are crunched like this in a 6-week course, but give yourself just a little bit of space so that you can go back in and push yourself a little bit further. Good luck and have fun.